Let's make one last mention about the line with a5. So bishop c5, f4, d6, knight f3. And now knight to f6. We haven't seen this at all. So what's the trick here? It's a bit unusual, but it's important because you gotta remember that you got double attack on the pawn e5, but it's a poison pawn. You don't want to take it. If take, then the knight goes here, then you fall for this silly move. Queen d4 attacks the knight and also threatens checkmate. You can't save both of them. Yeah, you can play knight to d3. Position is like actually equal, but it's like slightly better for black. Then the bishop will have to go to b6. This is the best move. And now white's best move is queen to f3. It's like, yeah, it's equal. So bishop g4 now attacks the queen. You'll have to move the queen to g3, but you can also look for a swap. But the best move is queen to f4. It's still playable. But let's take it from the start and see what the best move really is and how to play the most accurate. So c5, bishop c5, f4, d6, knight f3, and now the early knight f6. You gotta finish your development before you can start an attack. So bishop c4, castle, and now d3. Normal moves. A move like bishop to g4 allows you to play knight a4 with an attack on the bishop. The bishop is trapped. You'll be able to give the knight for the bishop, and it's like a transposition from position since before. You're retaining the bishop pair. And so let's not look at bishop g4. Let's rather look at this move, a5. This is a very accurate move because it allows the bishop to go anywhere on this diagonal, and the bishop will stay on this diagonal. We can never really castle. Okay, a4 is the best move, and after bishop to g4, we can now finally take in e5. Strangely enough, because after take back, well, we are putting pressure on this pawn. We're threatening to take it, but we are developed enough to afford to take that pawn. h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop g6. How do we deal with this? Queen e2. Don't have to take that pawn right away. Knight to c6. Okay, one of those positions where you don't really know what to do. Okay, knight to b5. The knight cannot be removed from that square, and you can play as you prefer. You can play bishop d2, bishop c3, or maybe c3, b4, depending on what black does. Let's see some ideas here. Knight to b4 by black. The idea of playing c6 and kick the knight away. h4. This is the thematic move. You're threatening h5, winning a piece. And this is not a free pawn in g4, obviously, because you will play h5, and the bishop remains trapped. Knight to f2 attacks the rooks, looking for compensation. Rook to e2. That's it. Knight to g4 attacks the rook again. Take the bishop. They take our rook. Okay, queen takes back, threatening checkmate in h7. Pawn takes in g6, obviously. Bishop to g5 attacks the queen. The pawn cannot push because it's pinned. Queen move away, queen to e8. King to d2 is the best move by black to stop the knight from taking c2. And this king is on borrowed time. You're going to be able to play rook h1 and so on. And back in this position earlier, we went through what happens when the knight takes the pawn in g4. What if black just plays h6? Now here you obviously know the pattern. You play h5. Bishop is forced back, and now g5. The opening on these fires on the opponent king is inevitable. You're completely winning. So what happens if instead our opponent plays here, and instead of h6 plays h5, just to stop the advance of that pawn? Okay, well, now we recapture this pawn that, as we mentioned, was free to be taken. You're also threatening to take this piece. Let's see how to deal with this move. c6, attacking our knight. Crazy enough, best move is to take the bishop. Even though this comes with an attack on our knight, the thing is, well, with this pawn cannot really take our knight in g6 anyway. So after pawn takes the knight, we just take back. This is important. The bishop remains on this diagonal. And now when the rook moves, because it's being attacked by the knight, bishop g5 is the best move. We're pinning the knight. We're going to be taking this pawn. It's a fantastic position to play. The king can't really unpin that pawn to attack the knight, because then he will just go back to f4. And then when the pawn takes our pawn in g4, c3, the knight is trapped. So let's go to this position. Earlier we just went through bishop h5, g4, blah blah blah. What if black takes the knight and say, you know what, this pawn is weak in e5, I'll just take the knight and let's carry on with the game. Okay, queen takes back. And now knight to c6 threatens this annoying knight d4 move, which forces you to go back to d1. So knight to e2 is the best move, believe it or not. Because even though, like, you know, you don't really want to lose this knight, because you want to play knight g3, knight f5. Knight f5 is the perfect move in this open, this strongest move that you can play in the Vienna. The knight in f5 will be sitting like the emperor that it is. So knight to d4 can come now, and now this trade with our knight is forced. Well, fine, we'll accept it. But now the bishop takes back, and this is why this variation, when black plays like this, it's always been very annoying to me. The reason being that you can't really castle at all. You can't develop this bishop without losing this pawn. It's annoying, especially if you move this bishop, the bishop takes in b2, you don't even have that rook b1 move. So what to do now? You play rook f1, and you're putting a lot of pressure on this file. You're gonna play bishop to g5 a lot, and you're gonna capitalize on f6 because the bishop will be pinned in the knight. A move like h6 doesn't work to stop bishop g5 because you can just take in h6. Pawn takes back, you want a pawn. Queen and the rook will be attacking f6 anyway. If instead our opponent plays bishop c5 right now, instead of h6, if instead our opponent plays bishop to c5, the whole bishop g5 move doesn't work because black plays bishop e7, and then the knight is not really pinned, and it's kind of safe. The best move now here is queen to g3. You're threatening bishop h6. So king to h8 now, obviously to stop the bishop from being able to go to this square. Now you take the pawn in e5. There's no compensation here at all, and you keep going with extra pawn and the bishop pair in this endgame. So let's look at this line now. Bishop c5, f4, and the immediate pawn capture. Okay, knight f3, and after knight f6, we punish it immediately with e5. Knight to g4, going for the attack on f2, d4. That just does the job. Okay, the bishop moves. Let's go to b4, or later we're going to see bishop e6. Now here we just recapture the pawn in f4, and black has just wasted time. Castle, for example, you just play h3. The knight's got nowhere to go. The knight is forced to h6. You take it. Pawn takes back. Queen to d2, targeting this square, and it's unstoppable. We are going to go there no matter what. f6 is the best move according to the engine. It allows the rook to play, and the pieces to go back into defense of the king. Take this one. Queen to e7. Long castle. It's important to play long castle. Bishop takes knight will put us in a bad position, will expose the king, but we're okay. First of all, give a check. Bishop c4 check. King moves, obviously. Knight to h4. Ignore the capture here. Ignore this bishop. Don't recapture the piece because we're threatening knight g6 winning the queen. Our opponent will have to do something about it. Rook to g8. Stops that. Okay, fine. Once again, ignore the bishop here in c3 and take the pawn in f6. You're attacking the queen. And the queen can't take back because we're protecting that square. Bishop b2 is the Zwischenzug here. Check. Obviously, you don't want to take. Don't want to give some checks or some initiative to our opponent. So you just play king b1. Queen e8 is the only move now for our opponent. Puts more defense over this square. Rook h2 e1 attacks the queen. The queen will have to move. Queen to d8. But now simplify by taking this rook. And can't take back with the king because then you checkmate. Can't take back with the queen either because rook e8 pins the queen to the king. And when you get captured, then you got a checkmate. So here from the start, bishop c5, f4, the early capture, play knight f3. We're looking at the variation with knight f6. Attack it straight away. Knight g4, d4. Bishop b4, recapture the pawn in f4. And earlier we went through what happens after castling. You can punish it with h3. And what happens if black plays d6 first? Bishop to d3. Castle. h3 again. Knight to h6. Bishop takes. Pawn takes. So you see how that was inevitable. It was going to happen no matter what. Queen to d2 now. But now it looks different because our opponent can take in e5 and open the files on our king. Let's see. Does our opponent have any compensation? Queen takes h6. Remember, there's a threat of checkmate, so black can't really take this pawn or do anything else. Queen h7 is checkmate with the support of the bishop, so f5. Take the pawn in e5. Crazy enough, even though our king is in the center. Queen to e7, protects a little bit of everything, puts pressure on e5. Castle, and we're okay. Queen to g7. Desperate for swaps, obviously, but no, it doesn't work. Bishop c4 check. King moves, queen check. King takes back. We are swapping now because now we can play knight d5. We're attacking this pawn. Bishop a5, defense c7, now c3. c6 attacks the knight. We have to move the knight away. Knight e7. e5 attacks the bishop. What to do? Ignore it. Just take this bishop. When they take our bishop, the pawn structure looks horrible for our opponent. So after knight takes, what if rook takes back? Still threatening our bishop. Bishop e3, knight a6, developing. The idea of going knight to c5. Trading were great, bishop maybe controlling the square e4. g4 comes by white. We gotta open the files. Knight c5 attacking, threatening that swap. Bishop to c2, you're okay. Threatening b4, position completely winning at this point. And if we take it from the start once again and go through bishop b6 now, so f4 early capture, knight f3, knight f6, e5, knight g4, d4. What if bishop to b6, staying on a good diagonal? Okay, just take this pawn. d6, bishop to g5 attacks the queen. The queen will have to move. f6 is horrible because you see, you just take it, right? How's black gonna take back? If he takes the pawn, play bishop f4, and look at how many empty squares around the opponent king have. Where is he going to castle? I mean, if he castles, it's horrible. Whereas if instead here black recaptures with the knight, seems to be making sense. Now you play bishop c4 and our opponent just loses the right to castle forever. This pawn cannot be pushed because the knight is pinned, so you can take it for free. Position evaluated as if white was almost up a piece already. So in this position, after bishop g5, queen to d7, what happens now? h3. The knight is forced to h6. Take. Bishop c4 comes now. Pawn takes in e5. What to do now? Queen e2. Pin it. Pawn can't take. Bishop takes in d4 is a suicide because you just castle long and you won a piece. And it's not like our opponent can just play queen to e7, unpinning the bishop like that, because you will play knight d5. And when the queen moves, okay, queen e6, you fork and you win it with the knight. Queen going anywhere else allows you to just take the bishop for free, since the e5 pawn will immediately be pinned. So in this position, after queen e2, knight to c6 developing. What happens now? Knight to d5. Okay, queen to d6 by our opponent. Well, obviously this is to stop knight f6 from winning the game. So queen to d6 and now long castle. What to do now? If black plays bishop e6, which is a very reasonable move, the idea of taking this knight, then you can just take in b6 for free, because when the bishop takes your bishop, you recapture with the knight and you win a piece. So, and also, well, okay, after knight takes here, you might say that the pawn can take, but then d5 is a fork. So here, instead of bishop e6, if black plays bishop to d7, just to make an example, and pawn takes e5 is devastating. So in this position, after long castle, what if black just castles? Seems like it could be making sense, considering that there's nothing else to do. But now you take the pawn in e5 again, queen to g6, and let's see if the game continues normally. No, because knight f6, check, king h8, bishop to d3 attacks the queen will have to move, but there's really nowhere that makes sense to go to. We're also threatening the knight and the bishop, both threatening to go to h7, so bishop to f5 to stop that. King to b1 is the best move, always useful. Bishop takes, rook takes, no need to swap pieces if we have the initiative. Rook a to d8, black is fully developed. What's going on? Knight h4 attacks the queen will have to move. Queen to g7, rook h to d1, doubling up. Knight to d4, attacking the queen. Does it work? No, because queen e4. Knight to e6, to protect the rook more so that the black player doesn't have to worry about losing material. However, swap everything. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, knight takes. Knight to f5 attacks the queen. Queen to g6, g4. Black is in Zugzwang, can't do anything. Look at a5, only type of move that can be played. Queen to d5. Knight to e6. Joining the game once again, you just take the pawn in b7. There was nothing else to do. Knight f8 to bring more defense. a3, h5. It's Zugzwang. There's nothing to do. It's an incredible position. Queen to b8 pins the knight. Bishop to c5 defends it. b4 should end the game because the bishop's got nowhere else to go. That's just an example of, this line, and all the moves were forced. But obviously you know how to deal with such position now. Before we close this video though, let's look at one more line. This is from a similar scenario. The early knight c6 game, as we know, we play f4. What if black plays bishop c5? This looks like some sort of transposition, but it's not, because we've never seen this before. So let's look at this line because it's interesting. You play knight f3 now. There was a time where I used to think that this was a good move. but it's actually not. Pawn takes an e5 looks like a good move, because if black recaptures, then you can play d4, and it's a fork. But obviously, you shouldn't play that move, because, you see, even though you think so, after f4, you take here, the opponent doesn't have to take you. He could rather play d6, which is the best move, and black now has a lead in development. This is all fine, and he's going to recapture this pawn with the pawn. If you do take this pawn, the other opponent's just completely developed queen d6, and after the knight moves and castled, you have absolutely nothing developed, and you can't really castle anytime soon, because you're going to have to castle queenside. So that's actually not recommendable. Let's take it from the start in the variations with, okay, you can also do it like this, bishop c5, f4, and then knight c6. So, you know, the move order might change, but this is the position. It's the position of the game with bishop c5 and knight c6. Okay, best thing here is to take in f3. Pawn takes back now, and now d4 is not the right move. Be careful to this, because our opponent has a pawn in f4. Remember the pattern, it's attacking g3, therefore queen h4 is a threat. So knight d4 now, the knight can take here, you can't take back, because when you take back, the queen is coming here with a check. You're going to have to move the king, and you don't want to get into this. When you do, black can play d5 with the threat of bishop check, also the threat of simply taking this knight. If you do take, then bishop g4. These are all very strong moves, and if you do allow bishop g4, even if you can play knight f3, then the black player will have access to f2 with the queen, and it's a joke, and you're not going to last long. So let's restart this. This is the variation bishop c5, and then knight c6, knight f3. Take the pawn. Now you have to be careful. Bishop c4 is the best move, even though you can't castle. Let's see 2 options. Just 2 lines, and then we'll close this video. Knight f6, you play d4, because knight f6 prevent the queen from going to h4. Now you can't play that move. Bishop to b4, this is a thematic move. The idea is to put pressure on this pawn. You don't care about any of that. You just castle. Now, obviously, taking the pawn here, taking the pawn in e4 is wrong, because queen e2 wins the knight. f5 to defend the knight. Obviously, d5 is not possible, because you got a lot of attack over that square. And bishop to c3 is not like some sort of bishop to or anything. Bishop takes c3, you just take the knight first, and then you recapture the bishop later. So d5 here, you could take, you know, you got the support of the knight and the bishop and so on. So what if black plays f5 to defend that? Okay, knight takes, and this is a winning position. You're gonna take back, but then queen takes. The king cannot castle. Look at how strong this bishop is. You're gonna capture in f4 as well when our opponent suggests a trade. You can play c3, removing the bishop from that square. The knight is jumping to g5, and then f7. The game plays itself. So in this position, straight after castling, the pawn cannot be taken. So after castle, e5. After knight to g4, we finally recapture this pawn. d6. Now how to deal with this? Bishop to g5. Very similar patterns. The patterns are always the same in chess. Queen to d7. h3 attacks the knight. Now obviously, if the knight goes back to h6, in this specific situation, because black has got quite an attack on e5, and is threatening to swap pieces, then we don't really want to take this knight in h6 in this case. You play knight d5, and now you're threatening to take this knight for free, because when the pawn takes back, knight f6 wins the queen. So that means our opponent will have to leave the bishop in b4 and do something about it. So king to h8 to get out of the pin is met with the unbelievable knight f6 move. This is beautiful. Comes with an attack on the queen will have to move. If the knight is taken, then take back, check, king to g8, queen to c1 is the silent killer. You're going all the way to g5 and checkmate. So queen to f5, the idea of going to g6 and try to save the game from that, is met with knight to h4. Queen to h5, trying to stay close to this to the king side and offer some defense to that poor king. Bishop to e2, kicks the queen away, and it's game over very soon. So in this position, after the crazy knight f6 move, what if white tries to move away? But you see, there's nowhere to go. I mean, if you go on the dark squares, you've got ideas like knight h7, attacking the rook, discover attack on the queen. It's not good. What if black plays queen to f5, trying to go away from there, but now bishop to d3. Okay, queen to e6, getting out of the attack of the bishop. d5, harassing the queen once again. She will have to go to e7, it's the only move, But now knight to h7, again, there's an attack here, an attack here, position evaluated +7 or something like that. So let's leave it there and let's see if we can finally close this video with this line: knight c6, knight f3, pawn taking in e4, bishop c4. So in this position, what if black plays knight to h6? The idea is to continue the pressure of the square h4, preventing us from playing the move d4, because as you know, this can be taken because the moment you move the knight away from f3 to take in d4, queen h4 comes, and it's really hard. However, I've encountered this line myself and I didn't play d4 because I actually didn't know this line, the one with knight h6. It actually doesn't work because you can play d4, believe it or not. Now, knight takes, how to deal with this? Take the pawn in f4. You just don't take this knight because there's no threat going on. And now that the bishop has taken back, queen h4 isn't threatening anything. If a move like queen f6 comes with an attack on this bishop, this is punished immediately with knight to d5. Attacking here, defending here. The queen will have to move again, but then you still have a double attack on c7. So you're winning the game. It's already over. Also here, this check doesn't do anything. Pay attention, taking with the queen is not good because queen takes b2 is very dangerous and it's attacking the rook. You're gonna have to, and you can't really castle the king. It's a terrible position for the king to be. You have to take with the pawn, and now the attack on the queen remains, the attack on the c7 remains, and also queen b2 now just doesn't do anything because the rook and the queen are defending each other, so you're okay. So in this position, by the way, we just went through queen f6, trying to continue development. Doesn't work. What if the knight just takes a knight with check? Fine, take back, and after d6, just take this knight for free because you see, can't be taken back because of checkmate. And in this position, instead of d6, what if our opponent castles? Obviously, it looks horrible, but it's actually the best thing to do. You can castle long, and now that the king is safe, you can think of taking this knight, and now the king is safe. And now a move like d5 doesn't work, right? The idea of attacking this bishop, simply because, the pawn is pinned. You could think of this move, bishop to g4 now, but the best thing to do here is simply rook takes in d5, which obviously comes with an attack on the queen, so you've got nothing to worry. If instead black actually plays d6, which seems like a normal move. Now here the best thing to do is to take this knight. Pawn takes back. And look, this is black having played the best moves in a faulty variation. And obviously, it's not like completely winning. It's position evaluated +150 or something. White plays knight to d5, threatening to reach the square f6 from where it would be very well placed, obviously. So after queen g5 check, most active reply, king to b1. And now if black plays bishop to b6 to stop the knight from going to c7, then you play h4. And the queen will have to go away. And h4 is a move you're going to play no matter what. Even if black plays, let's say, c6 to attack the knight, you play h4. So you play h4 anyway. To g6, knight e7 wins the queen. The queen going to g7, you play knight f6 check, king moves, and black has no moves. White plays bishop e2, what can black do? Nothing. Okay, you might say, let's say bishop e6 developing or something. Okay, g4. Going with the pawns, and remember, we're threatening to put pressure. And remember, we're putting pressure on h7. So here, bishop to b6, the idea of going to d8 and take this unbelievable knight is met with g5. Taking is stupid, because then rook h7 becomes game over. So bishop to d8 now here, what to do? Rook h to g1 is the best move. Obviously allowing bishop takes in f6, because that can't really happen. Now you're threatening. So now you're threatening to play moves like bishop to d3, e5, and then queen to h5. e5 protects this knight a little bit further. You're threatening to take this pawn, and the bishop is attacking crucial diagonal. The knight's attacking here, and this knight can never really be taken, because then when you take back, the rook traps the queen.